everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have, as you see, a list of people that are on this webinar. We want to give everybody an opportunity to be able to say a few words. We're only here for 2 hours and we have a lot to cover. So let me first start by introducing myself. My name is Kathy Elliott and I'm the CEO of WINS Girls, and I'm also the convener of the Black Girls Equity Alliance. I also want to have my co-facilitator introduce herself, and then we will move forward with the agenda.
Hi, everyone. I'm LaTrinda Sherrill of Common Cause Consultants, and I'm going to be supporting Kathy here today with our amazing panel.
Thank you, LaTrinda. So I want to really just jump right in and get started. But first, I wanted to lay some foundational kind of instructions. First and foremost, for all the panelists, can you please make sure that you are on mute so that when other people are speaking, because you all see we have a lot of people on this line, so that there's no distractions. The other is this is being closed captioned, and so if you need that service, you can check the chat, and there's information on how to access the link to be able to utilize that service. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We will be taking some questions from the audience, and wanted to just have two instructions. First, there's two options. There's the chat, and then there's also the Q&A. The chat is usually best used if you have a comment, or if you want to agree with something, or if you have additional information about whatever's being discussed to be used in the chat. But if you specifically have a question that you want to uplift, to please use the Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your screen. And that will allow us to be able to see that information. I want to say thank you to Heather Hobson from Motor Mouth Multimedia, who is managing our Facebook as well as all the monitoring and chat. And she will be able to uplift some of the information that comes in and help us to make sure that your voices and what's being shared is concerned. Because unfortunately, yes, we're in COVID and we're in a time where we have to use our technology to be able to connect. And we definitely want this to be a town hall where at some point we can have some conversation or get some input from the people who are in the audience. So without any further ado, I want to go ahead and get started. As you see, we will have a brief PowerPoint presentation. We are here today to, continue a conversation that has been started, and most recently, more intently since the release of our report on Monday, Understanding and Addressing Institutionalized Inequity, Disrupting Pathways to Juvenile Justice for Black Youth in Allegheny County. We've been over the past 3 years rather, and really more diligently over the past year, taking a deeper dive into looking at the school to prison pipeline, or just what does that mean here in Allegheny County. And so there has been several different forums where I believe everyone on this panel, as well as people probably in the audience, have voiced their opinion, have been able to give public testimony. And so for the most part, what I'm trying to say is that we kind of know where what people's position is on either addressing the issues that have been brought up in the report, whether it's even looking at removal of police from the schools. We all know, there are many different sides of, what people believe and also what want to see happen. But at the end of the day, we all want what's best for our children. And so even on this panel, there's people who may have differing opinions. And so what is so awesome about this group is that we can express those things, and we're going to start to work through what are some of those common areas, what is the common ground where we can now move forward. We understand what the data is. It's important to, yes, look historically on what has happened, But for this conversation, what we want to do is to move forward on solutions and look at the recommendations that have been made, and then have each of the different panelists talk about what they are doing or what they see needs to be happening within the systems that they represent. This isn't a forum for us to rehash what the problems are, although it is important to understand what has happened, and that is why we are actually going to do a brief presentation of our data. But we also, again, want to focus the majority of time on solutions. What is it that we can do collectively to, change what is happening, not only in Pittsburgh Public Schools, because yes, they have been highlighted, because as you all have seen, and we'll hear in a few minutes, Black girls have been referred to the juvenile justice system more frequently by the Pittsburgh Public Schools. But this is about all school districts, because there's the need for every institution to look at their policies and practices when it comes to the racial disproportionate rate of Black children being referred to their system. And so today we're going to specifically talk about the education system. So without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get started with the slides. Just wanted to lay the foundation and hopefully help us to have a productive conversation in ways that we can move this forward. So the Black Girls Equity Alliance was started about 5 years ago, following the initial report that was done, authored by Sarah Goodkind, who you will hear from today, who helped us with this report. But afterwards, we wanted to, start to see how can we address these issues. And so from there was working groups that were established. And one of them, it was the Juvenile Justice Working Group. And it is convened by Kimberly Booth, who you will also hear from today, and Sarah Goodkind. And we have set the standard to try to, have a mission to actually collectively, starting off saying that we are going to collaborate to address these issues, because we can't do it or by ourselves. As a community person, organizational leader, I can't do this by myself. The school district can't do it by themselves. The school police can't do it by themselves. So we all need to come together and figure out how we can do better. On the next slide, you will see that the Black Girls Equity Alliance is made up of many different partners. Again, we know that we in Pittsburgh, we're often siloed in the work that we do. We know that there's a lot of great work being done individually. How do we collectively come together? And at the end of this presentation, as well as at the end of this session, you will find out how you can potentially get involved, because it's not about just the people that are on this webinar. There are many people who are missing from this space that have historically been pushing the needle on equity in this space, and definitely want to make sure that, understand that we know that, there have been people who are out there doing the work and may not be included in this conversation, but hopefully in the next conversations that will follow, we will, have all these people at the table. On the next slide, we want to just take time, because out of all the partners that were listed, there are 3 foundations that have been very supportive of the work and the, making sure that this report got out and published. And so want to say thank you to Carmen Anderson from the Heinz Endowments, Michael Yonis from the Pittsburgh Foundation, and Christy Troutman from the FISA Foundation. These 3 partners, and I'm going to call them partners, they have been integral in the work that's being done, because it's not even just about them providing financial support. It has been the support of them at meetings and, being thought partners in this work. So thank you to them from the outset. And so, as I said earlier, we will have about a 15-minute presentation of an overview of the report that reviews the data as well as the recommendation. To start us off, we will have Sarah Goodkind from the University of Pittsburgh present her findings. Sarah.
Thanks, Kathy, and thank you to all of you joining us here today. As Dr. Elliott mentioned, I'm on faculty in the School of Social Work at Pitt and have been a member of the Black Girls Equity Alliance since its inception. I come to this work with 20 years of experience researching the juvenile justice system and other youth serving systems, and with a commitment to collaborate with people working in these systems to provide our young people with needed resources and opportunities, and to ensure that these systems are treating all of our young people equitably. 4 years ago, as was discussed, we produced a report where we calculated rates of racial disproportionality in referrals of young people to our juvenile justice system in Allegheny County. And we discovered that the magnitude of racial difference is much larger in our county than nationally. We also looked at self-report data from young people and saw that these differential rates cannot be explained by differences in behaviors for which young people can be referred to juvenile justice. So since then, as Dr. Elliott described, we've been working to understand where these referrals are coming from so that we can address this racial disproportionality. If you take one thing away from the information that we're sharing today, it should be that in Pittsburgh and Allegheny County, we are over-policing Black youth, and we need to find ways to help and support our young people without punishing and criminalizing them. I want to be clear that the criminalization of Black youth that our report documents is a manifestation of systemic racism that must be addressed at the system level. Too often, we try to reduce referrals to juvenile justice with programs aimed at fixing youth, when what we need to do is fix our systems. Unfortunately, in our report, we are only able to share data about Black and white youth, in part because these two groups constitute the overwhelming majority of youth in our city, and also because we're not doing a good job of collecting and disaggregating data for other racial and ethnic groups. With that caveat in mind, I'm turning now to a review of some of our findings. I'm starting by discussing referrals to juvenile justice, which you can see here. Juvenile justice is administered at the county level. A juvenile justice referral, also known as a delinquency allegation, is the youth's immediate entry point into the juvenile justice system, most commonly coming from police, judges, or probation officers. The good news is that juvenile justice referral rates in Allegheny County have been cut in half for most youth over the last 15 years, which mirrors national trends. The bad news is that for girls, the racial disproportionality in referrals has increased, and racial disproportionality in referrals for both girls and boys is much worse locally than it is nationally. In fact, Black boys in Allegheny County are referred at 7 times the rate of white boys, and Black girls are referred at 10 times the rate of white girls. As the next slide shows, this is because Allegheny County referral rates for Black youth are higher than national referral rates for Black youth, and because Allegheny County referral rates for white youth are lower than national referral rates for white youth. I want to note again that these differences in referral rates among Black and white youth cannot be accounted for by differences in behaviors. Just as an example, Black and white girls in Allegheny County have nearly identical rates of drug use, according to the Healthy Allegheny Teen Survey, which surveyed a representative sample of teens. Yet, Black girls in our county are 3 times more likely than white girls to be referred to juvenile justice for drug offenses. That our rates of juvenile justice referral for white youth in our county are lower than national rates tells us that we know how to avoid referring youth to juvenile justice, but that we have very different systemic practices for white and Black youth. This next slide shows the top juvenile justice referral sources in Allegheny County in 2019. Most juvenile justice referrals come from police via arrests, but they also come from district magistrates, schools, victims, and parents. You can see here that City of Pittsburgh police are the #1 referral source of Black boys, and that Pittsburgh Public Schools police are the #1 referral source of Black girls, whereas district magistrates are the top referral source of white youth. This next slide shows 2019 arrest rates for Pittsburgh youth. Similar to referrals to juvenile justice, we see very high levels of racial disproportionality that cannot be accounted for by differences in behaviors. Virtually all arrests of Pittsburgh youth are made by either city police or Pittsburgh Public Schools police. This next slide shows the proportion of arrests of Black girls, white girls, Black boys, and white boys that were made by these two police forces in 2019. As you can see here, 2/3 of all arrests of Black girls in Pittsburgh were made by PPS police, even though young people aren't at school for half the days of the year when you count vacations and weekends, and not all Black students in Pittsburgh attend PPS. This slide also shows that far more Black youth in Pittsburgh are arrested than white youth, though their numbers in our population are very similar. More than half of arrests of Pittsburgh youth last year were made by PPS police, and this next slide shows what these arrests were for. Here you can see that over half of the arrests of Black girls and almost half of Black boys ultimately resulted in a charge of disorderly conduct. Disorderly conduct is a catch-all charge that includes things like excessive noise, obscene gestures or language, and lots of other typical teenage behaviors. It's highly subjective, and there's a wealth of evidence that it's an offense for which implicit and explicit racial biases come into play. In 2019, all arrests of Pittsburgh Black girls that ultimately resulted solely in a charge of disorderly conduct were made by PPS police. These slides have demonstrated that we are arresting Black youth in Pittsburgh at extremely high rates. Arrests of young people disrupt their schooling and life trajectories. We don't have exact graduation and dropout rates for Pittsburgh students who are arrested, but we can say with certainty that our high arrest rates are having a detrimental effect on our students. And it's Black students, not white students, who experience high rates of arrest in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh Public Schools students are arrested at 8 times the rate of students in Philadelphia Public Schools, in large part due to the pre-arrest diversion program that Philadelphia has instituted. Pre-arrest diversion provides an opportunity for youth to receive help and support and has been shown to reduce future delinquency. As my colleagues will describe, one of our recommendations is to institute such a program here. I'm going to turn the floor over now to Gada Makushi to discuss summary citations, which is one of the other options that police have when they're called to a situation involving a young person. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. So summary citations are similar to a traffic ticket, and they're issued for minor infractions. Again, as Sarah stated, typically normal youth behavior categorized as disorderly conduct or for fighting, even if there was no physical altercation. And although receiving a ticket seems like a minor issue, they're actually harmful and can have long-term consequences on youth. For starters, they're adult criminal offenses. There is no distinction between juveniles or adults when it comes to citations as there are in arrests. With a citation, youth are required to appear before a magistrate and are not provided legal counsel, so they may not understand what all their rights are. If a student fails to appear to the hearing for any reason, they may be tried in absentia, so the trial can be conducted without their presence. And while they could appeal this within 30 days, again, they aren't offered legal counsel, so they may not know that they can do this or even how. Most summary citations typically result in fines, and this is how these minor infractions tend to escalate. If youth are unable to pay these fines, they are then charged separately with a failure to comply charge and referred to juvenile justice. In fact, failure to comply accounts for at least 1/3 of all referrals to juvenile justice within Allegheny County. So a child could get a citation for being too loud or cussing, and because they were unable to pay the fine related to that citation, they're now charged with failure to comply. Essentially, this punishes poverty. Summary convictions are also not automatically expunged, and a record of the summary offense cannot be expunged until 6 months after turning 18 and only if all conditions have been met. So if, like many youth at 17 or 18, they apply for a job, college, or military application, and they are asked if they have ever been convicted of a crime, they must say yes then, and at any time if that record has not been expunged. moving on to look at the data, we can see that nearly 70% of citations issued by city police are to Black youth, even though they account for only 40% of the youth population in the city. While 88% of citations issued by Pittsburgh school police were issued to Black youth, even though they account for only 53% of the student population. Black youth are also 10 times more likely than white youth to be referred to juvenile justice for failure to pay a fine. And disorderly conduct was again the most frequent charge cited, with 86% of disorderly conduct charges being issued to Black youth. So while much effort has been put into ensuring that most failure to comply charges are resolved through informal diversion, Pennsylvania's Juvenile Act does not preclude young people from being put on probation or placed in a facility if they fail to comply with the conditions set in juvenile court. And while Allegheny County Juvenile Probation Office have tried to ensure failure to comply referrals do not result in deeper system involvement, it is vital that we understand why youth are being referred and where these referrals are coming from, so we can stop the overcriminalization of Black youth. I will now turn this over to Kimberly Booth, who will talk about our recommendations.
Thank you, Gada. Sorry about that. I had a minute there. My name is Kimberly Booth, and I'm the Assistant Chief Probation Officer for Allegheny County Juvenile Probation and co-convener of the Juvenile Justice Work Group. Today, you are seeing a lot of data, and you're seeing a lot of big issues. Some of you are surprised, and some of you may not be. We encourage you to have discussions with your systems and departments about this information and have real talks about how your organization responds to disproportionality. Let's take a look at just a few recommendations that we can focus on. Ensure transparency and accountability from schools and other youth-serving systems. Change school policies that criminalize Black youth. Eliminate disorderly conduct as an infraction in school codes of conduct. Institute a moratorium on summary citations being issued at school. Ensure that all school policies and practices are structured to prevent the criminalization of Black youth. Provide educators with training and support they need to help rather than criminalize youth. Reallocate the funds formerly used for school police to hire additional school counselors, social workers, and psychiatrists. Implement a trauma-informed restorative justice approach in our schools. Support school personnel and working with students and disabilities.
So thank you for your presentations. I know that we went through that information fairly quickly. We are open and available to do additional meetings and sessions about the report and the data. And so you'll hear more about the upcoming meetings as well as our equity summit that will also offer an opportunity to further understand the information that was shared. So I wanted to just take a few minutes to say thank you to our panelists. And so as we move forward, they are going to introduce themselves, tell you what systems they represent, and then answer a few questions. And then we will have a period where we'll have additional questions and answers. But I just wanted to also, there's a lot of people that have been affiliated with this work that helped us to come to the conclusions that we've come to and to contribute to the report, and specifically the various systems. So Kim Booth and the staff from probation in their data, most of their data was utilized for the report, as well as DHS and then the city police. It's important for me to say that because even as we talk about, the data that was just shared, it's not data that we generated. It is from the partners that are affiliated with this group that work together to sit down and have conversations and to look at it. And then to really not even just look at the numbers, but to really look at the cases. And we had an opportunity to pull a few cases randomly to see such cases like a disorderly conduct, what happened, or a fine that ended up coming to the attention of the courts, what was that involved. And so I just wanted to lay that foundation, because it's not that we just invited people on to have this conversation. Some people are new to this group, but for the majority of us, we've been meeting for the past year or 2 years. And even some of the, kind of people who are not officially affiliated, such as like Chief Brown is on right now. We've in Commander Lando, who has been a part of our group. I see him now here too. He's here. Have come to our meetings for us to have conversations to better understand the information that is being shared and that went into the report. So I felt like it's important for us to say that, because we truly want to not only start this process in a collaborative fashion, but as we move forward to really work together to address these issues. So to kick us off, we're going to ask Kim Booth to, just give her, she doesn't need to reintroduce herself, but to give us information about probation's position and some of the thoughts and things that they are working on to address this disproportionality, who they really have been the leaders in doing this from the very beginning. If it wasn't for them being a partner, a lot of the information and the progress that has been made, we wouldn't be able to make it. So Kim.
Thanks, Kathy. I appreciate that, because we have been doing this work a while. As I look at the panelists, I remember years ago, actually, and it's been years, me and Jason Lando, I don't even think he was a commander at that time. I'm not even sure. But we did work with police officers and youth to help that relationship grow and stimulate years ago. So I did work years ago with Sam as doing all kinds of things as our systems cross over. So obviously Tiffany, my friend, and many others on here. And I'm glad that we've done work at juvenile probation with schools, our school justice partnership, and many other projects that we have. I like to say one of my favorite programs that juvenile court started many, many years ago, and I have to say this because it makes me feel better, is that the Community Intensive Supervision Program. It started because of the disproportionate minority number of boys being placed into the system, and they wanted to figure out a way to keep young men in the community and not be placed outside of their home. And that program operates 7 days a week throughout Pittsburgh. We have 6 different offices, and we hire people from the community to help young men change their lives and be successful citizens in the community. It's an evening program, and they attend their daytime school. So that program to me has always been a model program, and a place where I think our court started to look at, hey, these are the numbers along the continuum. Where can we most affect these numbers? We didn't have it all right. We didn't get everything correct. But at this point, at the court, we were able to look at, do we have a temperature or not? And that's how we described our work over the years. What is our temperature? Let's start looking at, do we have a problem here? It's much like we're doing it now, right? Everybody's getting their temperature taken to figure out, you may have some symptoms, but take your temperature and see if you have COVID or not. Let's explore. Let's go see what it is, or is it just a cold? So the court has jumped on board, I think, for several years. And with all our partners here, I'm hoping that we can come up with some viable solutions to slow down those referrals. Thanks, Kathy.
Mm-hmm. I'm being a poor moderator. I don't even know who's next. Who's next on the list?
I think next we have Dr.
So
Hamlet.
next is Dr. Hamlet. I apologize. I was supposed to say that. That was my fault.
No worries. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anthony Hamlet, Superintendent of Pittsburgh Public Schools, and understand that I'm very grateful to be a part of this dynamic panel of professionals. And I'd like to share also a sincere thank you to the Black Girls Equity Alliance, Kathy Elliott, for inviting me to be a part of this program. And I'm hopeful this is the start of a powerful, progressive relationship between our organizations. As we strive every day to better understand the sources and causes of these inequitable juvenile justice engagements, the report shared today confirms what most of us already know. The numbers don't lie. We must do a better job at protecting Black children in Pittsburgh. When Kathy started this work back in 2016, I was just getting settled into Pittsburgh in my first superintendency. What I saw then and what I see now is that we cannot lose sight of our charge to work against racist ideas and policies that prevent our students from experiencing a bias-free education, period. That's very clear. That's what we're charged to do, and that's what we need to do. Creating a positive school culture was one of the 4 strategic levers that we outlined in our strategic plan. We've also been extremely intentional in our efforts to eliminate racial disparities in the achievement of African American students. As outlined in our On Track to Equity plan, it's been our most extensive and comprehensive equity plan to date. And next Wednesday, I'm pleased to share that our board will vote on a contract to conduct an analysis of the available police data and provide an external independent examination of the police calls for service, arrests, and citations of our African American, of all of our students. So I don't believe any school district has taken on something like this, and it shows that our district is, 1, is serious about reducing arrests, 2, has already taken action on some of the recommendations laid out in the report, and lastly, we are a leader in this work around the state. In July of this year, we developed and announced the launch of a suspension ban review team to impact the decriminalization of our youngest students, and that the committee will meet in the fall after the opening of school. And since 2015, the district's overall suspension rate has declined from 17.4% to 10.2% in 2019. And we saw a steady drop across all races of students. We know that there is still much more work to do if we want to remedy systemic iniquities and change policies and practices that Black youth receive help and support rather than exclusion and punishment. And the report shared today is just the beginning. We look forward to having this ongoing conversation, developing actionable steps in collaboration with the people in this room and others as well today as we look to support our Black youth in Pittsburgh. And I just want to reiterate the understanding of those numbers. We are not satisfied with those numbers. Yes, there are reductions, but until we see 0 arrests, 0 citations, we will continue to work, we'll continue to evolve, we'll continue to collaborate with any and all organizations who want to break the systemic iniquities that exist when it comes to the policing of our African American students. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Hamlet, I'm next, so I'm going to go. My name is Nina Esposito-Viscitis. I'm very proud to serve as the president of the 3,000 members of the Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers. We represent our teachers, paraprofessionals, and technical clerical workers. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm going to stick very closely to my notes because I don't want to go over to my 2 to 3 minutes time, and you know how teachers can get. We can talk a lot. So as educators, we care very deeply about our students and their families. So this report and discussions about this report and the actions on this report are so important to us because we want to make our school district a great environment for each and every one of our students and those who care about them. So we know that we all have to be part of this solution. It was disheartening and shocking to see the statistics as they're outlined in this report. And we're anxious to continue to work with the district, each and every one of you and other partners in the city and the region to make sure that the racial disparities called out here are eliminated, citations are decreased and limited, and we make every effort to use every resource to ensure that students and teachers are provided with the resources that they need to make teaching and learning environments in every one of our 55 schools, that to make sure that every one of them are clearly one, we want every one of our schools to be ones that teachers want to teach there, and to make sure that parents want to send their students there also. We've made some terrific starts with our restorative practices and PBIS programs, but we have to make sure that they're all well-funded and properly staffed. And there's total buy-in from the school administrator on down. We have to ensure that adequate time is allotted for proper training and that events and procedures are mandated in each and every one of these programs. We also have tremendous starts with our 9 community schools, and the PFT is the biggest cheerleader for our community school model. But once again, they need the resources and the time for authentic training, input, and time and team building for both the staff and the students and the community. We believe in a strong, well-supported, all hands on deck pre-arrest diversionary programs like what Philadelphia has implemented. We think it's vitally necessary to correct these numbers and support our young people with wraparound services. In fact, we welcome it wholeheartedly. We've had terrific discussions with AFT staff, that's the American Federation of Teachers, and members of the Philadelphia Federation of Teachers, including its president, Jerry Jordan, and about some of their wonderful programs, including a court class, which they do receive credit for. It was wonderful. It's a credited class where students themselves present their case in front of the jury of their peers about why they behaved the way they did, and students learn from their mistakes. They discuss it, they help each other get better, they learn about the court system. They have had tremendous success, and it was wonderful to learn about that program. I do want to address, though, very clearly that we are fully in support of many of the suggestions that you have made here, but we do believe that our well-trained school police play a very positive role in our schools, including mentoring our students and supporting them in a variety of ways. We have reported many times that 40% of our officers are African American and that more than 50% of our officers are women. Many of them grew up right here in Pittsburgh, and many of them were very proud, our PPS graduates. Our teachers repeatedly sing their praises also. But I do look forward to working with each and every one of you to make our schools even better, and I'm confident we can do it together also. Thank you so much.
So next we will have Samantha Murphy from DHS.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Murphy from Allegheny County Department of Human Services. My role is a resource manager and education liaison. I work in our integrated program services. So naturally, with the Black Girls Equity Alliance and the education focus, my role in the last 10 years coordinating supports around education throughout our department and our different offices has been, I've been present to the conversation from the beginning. But most recently, I got involved with the Juvenile Justice Committee in anticipation of the report released this week, because I also supervise a unit of resource specialists that are embedded within the magisterial district courts. So some of the data that was reported on today, as you saw, talked about processes with magisterial district courts that lead to juvenile court involvement. And my unit really is in a position to help make connections as early as we can to be more helpful and less punitive, which I think and I hope is one of the premises for us in this committee going forward. And so, myself aside, many of us at the Department of Human Services have been involved with the Black Girls Equity Alliance since 2016. We're a part of every work group, and our core business, is serving individuals and children and families, of course. The most core services that we serve around children are child welfare and child abuse, mental health and homeless supports. But we also have had a piece of supporting the work around these efforts with our data and analysis. And so some of that work was also represented in the report you have this week. And so when I think about this issue and see it from a human services lens, it's really about understanding the populations that we're serving, that using that trauma-informed approach, what happened to you that we got here today, not how can I punish you for what you just did, and really asking questions in a way that can help get to the core issues of why behavior has been difficult, and how we can really support that core reason instead of punish without a resolve. So, many of you know me, and we've all worked together, I think, in different ways. Pittsburgh Public Schools has always been a great partner with us. We know over the years that we serve almost 1 in 3 students at Pittsburgh Public at any one time. We have supports embedded in every building. and in the communities. And I, a lot of times with conversations like this, I think we talk about how can we create something new. And I just want to make a plug for knowing each other and knowing the resources and connecting with each other in ways that are working stronger, not harder, and really the fact that we are so resource rich here in Allegheny County, it's those connections that are going to get the help to the families and the kids that we serve. So thanks for having me today.
Thanks for Samantha. So next, Chief Brown, you're next. I know you're on the phone, wasn't able to join visually. Chief Brown. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
can.
There you
go. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here to hopefully shed some light on our plan to reduce arrests and hopefully reduce the possibility of our students not ending up as a statistic or in the prison pipeline. When I became assistant chief in 2013, I knew it was important to have a well-trained staff to deal with the complexities of our students. The trainings included de-escalation techniques, crisis management, restorative practices, which we got through the board, mental health training, which we got through the board, diversity training, crisis management, which we got training also. I thought these were some of the main things to have. I started in late '89. I was a security guard for 14 years before I became a police officer with the board. I am also a PPS graduate. As a result of this training, there has been a drop of arrests. Hopefully this will continue for years to come. Of course, I'm interested in helping our students succeed. My staff is also very vested in our kids. A partnership was formed between Allegheny DA's office, Magisterial District Courts, Allegheny County Juvenile Probation Center, Center for Victims of Violent Crimes, Department of Human Services, and Pittsburgh Public Schools to reduce the number of students entering into the prison pipeline. I became a member of the Center of Juvenile Justice Reform 2017. I, along with 2 assistant superintendents, the board president, principals, and a juvenile district attorney, attended a week-long training at Georgetown University to create a capstone. This was done to create a plan to decrease the possibilities of our students being arrested and slowing down the pipeline in prison. As long as I'm employed with the Pittsburgh Public Schools, I will continue to find ways to decrease arrests and citations, and also support our staff, the administrators, the teachers, and the students also. I'm open to advice and new ideas on making this happen. So I'm glad to be here also. Hopefully I can get some new ideas to give to my staff, so when we have crisis situations, we'll have the support of you guys and everyone else. That's it for me.
Commander Lando, I think you're next.
I'll be brief. Hello, my name is Jason Lando, commander with the Pittsburgh Police. I recognize most of the names I'm seeing on here today. I was the commander in Zone 5 for 5 years before being transferred over to Narcotics and Vice about a year ago. And one of the things I noticed being over in Zone 5 is just a lot of unfortunate and a lot of negative interactions between police and youth. So that's really one of my passions is trying to bring our officers and the youth closer together, whether it's training that we do for our officers, the implicit bias training, the procedural justice training that we put the department through. But also about 2 or 3 years ago, we started a pilot program called Youth Connections, where we would actually take small groups of Pittsburgh police officers and meet with small groups of kids at Pittsburgh Public Schools and also some of the churches within Zone 5. I'm really excited to say that program was just voted by the school board, I believe last month, and formally adopted in the city schools. So now we go in there not in any sort of enforcement capacity, but we go in there in a community engagement capacity to build relationships with the kids. And I've already heard so many stories about how the young people and the officers then encounter each other out in the street and those encounters go much smoother. So those are just a couple of the things that we have going on. The data is troubling. I've been sitting on the board or on the panel for about a year or two now, and it definitely merits further investigation. One of the things we discussed that I think is really important is that we really have to take a deeper dive into the information. And when I say deeper dive, I mean, you know, and Kathy knows, we talked about this in the meetings, rather than just looking at numbers, actually pulling all of these police reports and figuring out in every situation what led to that encounter. Is it something that our officers need better training on? Is it something that the public needs better training on? And when I say that, you know, oftentimes police officers, we are the ones that are called to situations. And once we're called, there's certain things we have to do. So when we talk about bias, police officers have bias, but we also see the community members have bias. So if someone's picking up the phone, calling 911 because a young black male or young black female is suspicious, and then the police show up, that's naturally going to increase the likelihood that there's going to be some sort of a negative encounter or an arrest. So I definitely think that this information merits a much deeper dive, but this is something I'm really passionate about, and I want to help in any way possible. So just thank you for having me today.
Thank you. Tiffany Sizemore.
Good afternoon, I'm Tiffany Sizemore. I'm an assistant clinical professor at Duquesne Law School. I operate the Youth Advocacy Clinic, where we represent kids in delinquency court and kids in special education and school discipline matters. So in terms of my initial reactions to the report, of course, I would say that it's disappointing, but not particularly surprising. Not surprising because I think that locally our reform efforts have mostly been incremental, and what's really needed is radical change, large scale change, systemic change that is long lasting. And I know that we will talk in the second half of this conversation about solutions. And so I don't want to get too deep into that type of feedback right now, but I think that could be one of the reasons why this data seems to be especially troubling. I think oftentimes people look at the data, they're surprised, they want more data. I don't think we need more data. We've had reports every year. The Center for Race and Social Problems at Pitt puts out a State of Black Pittsburgh essentially report. There's been reports from the city's Gender Equity Commission, and I know Sarah was on, and others. There continue to be reports right now. There's a state juvenile justice task force, which is showing data that is troubling across the state of Pennsylvania with regard to juvenile justice and disproportionality. And so I don't think that we need more data. I think that we need to actually start acting on the data that we know about the outcomes for Black children in Pittsburgh. I think that sometimes when people see the data, they what I've seen at policy tables is there's a lot of blame shifting. Well, it's not my agency, it's this agency. It's not the probation, it's the police. It's not the court, it's schools. It's everyone shifting the blame to another agency instead of every agency looking inward and saying, what can we do right now? Because at every decision point on the continuum from when a child first encounters a school police officer or a police officer on the street until the day that child's case closes in the system, at every single decision point, there is one or more stakeholders who have an opportunity to say, the buck stops with me. Today, I'm the person who's making the decision at this point in the case, and I can do something to push back against racial disparities. And it just continues to not be done in Allegheny County, and I'm not exactly sure why. Again, people have inconsequential arguments about data. Is it 6 times the rate, 10 times the rate? Is it 3 times the rate or 4 times the rate? And the longer that we continue to have these conversations that are sort of looking at the problem without addressing the problem, we have children who continue to be pushed into the system that don't need to be there and who are traumatized. There is trauma associated with the system, period. It's an interruption to your life as a young person. It's an interruption to your educational patterns. Even if you're on a community-based disposition, when you have to go and check in with a school-based probation officer, when you have to come to court, when you have to talk to a lawyer, when you have to appear before a judge, there's many, all of our stakeholders have good intentions, I think, and people try to make it as easy as possible in terms of not having kids miss days of school unnecessarily, not being overbearing or scary when parents and kids are in the courtroom, but there's still trauma associated with the process. And so while we're looking at the problem, children are suffering. In terms of the clinic, the way that we address these issues, obviously we're lawyers, we represent kids and parents, but first of all, I have very rarely, if ever, said no to any policy table that we've been asked to sit at, no matter who the stakeholders at the table are. I think the work that Kim described in the beginning about the conversations between police and youth was critical work that was has happened in the county in the past, and hopefully someone will fund us to do that work again. I think that that work could be especially important now. Commander Lando was part of that, as we are in a really critical moment for our country with policing, racial bias, and the Black community. And so I hope that somebody is watching this webinar who might fund that work again, because I think when we were preparing for those meetings, one of the things that we talked about was if we can just have one kid connect with one police officer in this session so that an interaction on the street could go more smoothly, it could literally save a life. And so we will come to the policy table with whoever asks. In terms of the clinic work, we operate a holistic model. We work uniquely at the intersection of the school to prison pipeline. And we try to provide as much community support as possible to our clients. And when necessary and appropriate, we strongly engage in litigation to try to extricate kids from these systems who don't need to be there, or to move them through the system as quickly and smoothly as possible. So thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Judge Catherine Hens-Greco, and I've been a judge in the Family Division in Allegheny County for 15 years. And as one part of this juvenile justice system, and you're hearing from all different pieces of the juvenile justice system, the court's role is to ensure that there is balanced and restorative justice between a victim who is injured and a person who caused the injury. And for a lot of the time in the court system, who did what seems to consume a great deal of system time and resources. When I looked at the data in the report about the disproportional representation of Black girls at each stage of the juvenile justice system, it asks us basically to stop and look at this process in this system from a different lens and consider a reallocation of system time and resources. I focused my thoughts a little bit on the experiences that occur in the courtroom, because that's what I do. And I think it's important to understand that the time between the event that occurred and a court hearing is very important and is a long time. There's a large number of referrals coming from schools, and generally they result from some sort of a school fight. But from the moment that that incident occurs until the moment I see that youth in my courtroom, it can be several months. Now, for a youth involved in a school fight, after several months, even the reason for the fight is the stuff of distant memory. And the possibility for what we all hope for in youth who are involved in these situations is long-term skill development and empathy for an injured person, in limited future involvement with the system at all. But we lose that opportunity because of the time. I want to point out that the court system in the civil division has long used some sort of dispute resolution or mediation to resolve conflicts very successfully. And it appears to me that mediation by people who are willing to do it sooner would be most effective, both in a school community where the conflict occurred or in our backyard. It also could be part of what the court orders or asks parties to consider as a diversionary practice. it's an important piece to recognize that when you remove from the youth's experience what the actual injury was or what actually happened just by the passage of time, we lose such incredible opportunities. Despite years of reform efforts, this disproportionality continues to exist. And the serious consequences of doing nothing right now, when we know this data, and the data is clear, is that we are in essence allowing this additional criminalization of adolescent behavior, which we all know the results of that are devastating. So I'm very committed. I was really excited to get asked to be a part of this. And of course, when Kim Booth calls, I always say yes. So I'm very glad to offer whatever help the court can offer in terms of our role, and we do play a significant role in it, to determine what we can do to address disproportionality. So thank you for inviting me.
Good afternoon. I'm Judge Jennifer McCready. I'm also a judge in the Family Division here in Allegheny County. And like Judge Hans Grieco, when Kim Booth calls, I say yes. So I'm very happy to be here today. Sort of piggybacking off of what Judge Hans Grieco said is, you know, the data, of course, is disturbing. It's shocking. I think the first things that came to my mind was, you know, we can do better, we should do better, and we will do better. And I think that we have a very solid bench in the juvenile division. We have very committed judges who have been there for a while and who want to be there, who aren't just sort of biding their time in juvenile court. And so I think there's a strong commitment from the bench to do better and to support programs and policies to make things better for youth and better outcomes. When I was looking at some of the things that the court has done to try and have more of an objective look at youth in the juvenile justice system, two things came to mind. Was the screening tool that was implemented to reduce detention, and the youth level of service, which was implemented to help judges and guide judges in decision making in terms of recidivism rates and really, you know, in terms of placement. And both of those tools have, while I wasn't a judge when they were first implemented, when I was talking to my colleagues, I guess I understand there was some pushback when they came out. There was concern that there would be a rise in crime rates. There was a concern if kids weren't detained, you know, that we needed to have these kids detained until they could get before their judge. And really, it has reduced detention quite a lot, quite significantly. And it hasn't caused the concern that that came from the pushback. While neither one of these tools has addressed the disproportionality, what we were looking at was that we know that we have a structure in those tools, and so hopefully we could look at that structure and try and see if we could take the fidelity of that structure and that model and try and use that as well in the court to try and look at this issue of disproportionality. Because I think both of these instruments they're objective, and they've reduced placements for youth as well as reduced detention. We always support diversion programs. You know, the best day of my day would be if I didn't have a delinquency docket. So, but with diversion programs we always support. And I know we have our Foundation of Hope program here in Allegheny County, which has been a partner with the court and has been an excellent program. And we would also support any type of court class. I've seen this in other jurisdictions where it's a peer-on-peer court, or as it was mentioned by Nina, the court class. I think the court would also support that type of relationship with any of the school districts, and being part of that. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to be part of this conversation, and excited for all of these ideas and moving forward. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, everyone. I think I'm next then. My name is Jay Hughley. I'm the interim director at the Center on Race and Social Problems. And I am an assistant professor at the School of Social Work here at Pitt. And I guess you could say I'm the executive director of the Just Discipline Project, where we do school climate and discipline intervention work, mainly in Woodland Hills, with Superintendent Harris and the whole team out there, sponsored by the Heinz Endowments, and we greatly appreciate their support, and Carmen Anderson in particular. I want to thank Kathy and Sarah and Kim and everyone else that's put all of this effort and passion into this important body of work. I'm honored to be here with this amazing panel of people from across the board, different views, but I think has been said, a common commitment to helping our children succeed and our Black girls in particular. So, you know, my initial thoughts on reading the report, and I've you know, as been said, we've had many reports come out, and I've been a part of some of them, but they're always devastating to me. And on a personal level, you know, I grew up in neighborhoods like the ones many of our kids live in. I attended schools like Westinghouse and or Woodland Hills Intermediate or different places where, you know, we're working to turn our practices around. And it was just such a some of the clearest evidence I've seen of what the school to prison pipeline is really about. And it's home to me because I have friends who, from stupid stuff they got, you know, punished for in middle school, had the whole trajectory of their lives changed. And when I read the report and they talked about punishing poverty, you know, these court fines, these summary citations and how damaging they are. We don't even think about that over the long term. And that racism really does operate on multiple levels. When we think of biases in school discipline and in school arrests and criminalization, we think of these interpersonal interactions where someone might make a biased decision, and that's really is true, and that's really important. But we also have to understand that when a kid does come to school, having dealt with trauma, having dealt with poverty, having dealt with community violence, and they're not in a great place, that is also a response to structural racism that historically has made Pittsburgh a place where Black people are segregated and have not had access to the best jobs and have been over-policed. And we see this cumulative effect locally and nationally. So those were some of the takeaways for me as I looked at these statistics and thought about them in the broader context. When I think about solutions, and you know, we've worked hard and it's hard work, so I celebrate everyone here that's trying to change practice to be more developmental. There are a couple of things that have been really important for our program and working in the schools effectively. First off, you know, we think about how we respond to behaviors. But really what's critical before that is the kind of climate we set up in the school in the first place. And it requires proactive attention to school climate, to relationship building in the building, so that kids feel loved and cared about when they walk in the door. And that goes a long way. I think any of our youth practitioners here would know and agree with that. As one practitioner told us, in order to use restorative practice, you actually have to have something that you want to restore. And in too many cases, there's nothing to restore. So we have to be attentive to our school climate, our school culture, our relationship building in our schools. That's number one, and that's bedrock fundamental. Number two, and I will agree with my colleagues from the school district here, it does take additional resources. You know, I bet we all wish it didn't. When we talk to teachers, what they have been pretty open to the kinds of things that we talk about with restorative practice and whatnot, but they've said we need training and we also need personnel to support the work. And in our program model, we have a restorative practitioner in the building to lead the work. And when you put someone in the building to help be attentive, not just how you respond to behaviors, but to build the climate of the school, teachers see that as an asset. You're not only asking them to add another thing to their plate, you're building an asset into their repertoire. And it goes a long way in working with them to change practice. Another key here is that the principal absolutely has to drive the work in the school. Without the principal support, this is not going to work in any capacity. We have found that out. We've worked with different principals and seen different styles. We have colleagues from across the country that we work with on these issues, and that is fundamental. And that does mean, you know, from a hiring perspective, you're looking for people that believe in relational practice, that believe in the holistic potential of kids, and that want to bring those kind of practices to their building. You're not looking for these military style school leaders, these disciplinarians. That's not effective. So we need to think about that on the training side and on the hiring side. And the last thing I'll say here, and you know, we can come back to some of these things in the discussion. You know, the resource scale that we're talking about is big. You know, in the report, they do a nice job detailing what it means to have another social worker, another counselor in the schools. You know, the ratios are terrible right now. If the recommendation is 1 every 250, one for every 100 students in high-need schools, we're so far short of that. You know, I want to point out, if we tomorrow snapped our finger and made every police officer a social worker or a counselor, that's only 20 more in PPS, and there's 54 schools. So I am in favor of doing anything possible to reduce arrests and the need for police in schools and police presence in schools. I think we need to think hard about not just people in this room, but people in the broader conversation to get more to the schools and more to the districts to do this work. Now, that's not to say there aren't things we can do right now and that we can do tomorrow, because there's no evidence that arresting kids helps the kids. It obviously hurts them very badly, but there's also no evidence that arrests or suspensions even are effective for the non-suspended kids. So we're just engulfed and engaged in a practice that's harmful to kids. And we need to find a short-term way out, and we need to find a long-term way out. Thanks.
Thank you, Jay. I think Cheryl Kleiman.
Thanks, Kathy. Good afternoon. I'm Cheryl Kleiman. I'm a civil rights attorney with the Education Law Center. The Education Law Center is a nonprofit law firm that represents students and parents in public education to advance education and justice. And part of what we do is help individual students and parents address the issues and barriers they're experiencing in school. But at the heart of how we do that is understanding that these individual experiences are part of a collective and the larger way that schools, institutions, and systems work together, either to promote the type of positive school climate that Dr. Hughley was just talking about, or to criminalize children for responding appropriately to the unjust systems and situations they find themselves in. So at its core, we do this work by listening. I can tell you all day what the law says and what's supposed to happen in schools, but I'm a white woman, I'm not a parent, I'm doing this work normally comfortably from my office, but at the moment from my home, and I don't have the benefit of the lived experience of being in school every day. So I listen to the students and families about what they want and what they need, and try to use the law to help us get there. Because when we listen to students, we know that students are not safe in school. But it's not from some outside danger that we need police to keep out. They're not safe from the harms they experience in school. They're not safe because they don't have access to the supports and services they need, and are instead met with cultures of surveillance, exclusion, and punishment. So when we think about the report and next steps and going further and deeper into this work, we urge us all to continue to remember that Black students are not a monolith, that many of us come to this work with a deep love and commitment to center the experiences of Black girls, And because we know that the students who live and learn at the intersection of multiple oppressed identities get pushed into the juvenile justice system and out of school at higher rates and through their own unique pathways. So when we're talking about meeting the needs of Black students with disabilities, those who are immigrants and refugees, or Black girls who are queer or gender nonconforming, our work is about ensuring that they have a seat at the table, that is built into how we are thinking about these solutions and the work going forward. So we are so grateful to be an invited guest to this conversation, to contribute to this report, and eager to do this work together with students, parents, and communities to advance the local recommendations that were identified. The Education Law Center is also looking at what needs to be done at the state level and federally to benefit the students here in Pittsburgh. Because as we're working to get more funding for schools and protect the advances that are currently under attack from all levels of our government, we know that our vision of just schools is not about legal rights or protections, but about freedom, where all Black children can learn and thrive. Thank you.
Okay, who's next?
Megan.
Megan Black. Megan, are you there? Can you unmute yourself?
Yes, can you see me and
No,
hear me?
we can hear you, but we can't see you.
Oh, well, I apologize because my camera light is on, so I don't know what's going on. But my name's Megan Black. I'm a deputy district attorney with Allegheny County. I've been with the county as a prosecutor for over 20 years, and 16 going on 17 of those years, I've been involved exclusively in our juvenile delinquency unit. I currently supervise the unit of 5 other attorneys. We are responsible for being involved in prosecuting all the delinquency cases that come into Allegheny County Court of Common Pleas. I'm really appreciate being included in this panel and being involved in this project. I try to be responsive to any court initiatives or other opportunities like this program, in part because I would agree with a lot of the sentiments that have already been expressed. There are issues with our court system. There are issues with the experience that our kids have. There are difficulties when victims are involved, because we do want to promote sensitivity and restorative efforts on behalf of victims. We want to hold kids accountable for their choices, but more importantly, we really want to see them develop the competencies that will help them to be successful, because every single one of our kids that come through court, it's juvenile court is very unique in that myself and all of my attorneys, we want to see these children do well. We want to see them succeed. We want to see them have pride in themselves and their accomplishments. We want them to be safe and to grow up to be, healthy and productive adults. And I think the conversations like this, I'm always appreciative of being involved, because while my role may not be until diversion efforts have been attempted and maybe have not been successful, or have not been attempted because they weren't available, or whatever the case may be, I don't encounter the kids until things are a little bit farther down the line. But knowing what kinds of programs are out there and what these efforts are about helps me to be more informed as a prosecutor, and I think ultimately to do better on behalf of both the kids and the communities that we're all supportive of as prosecutors and the office of the district attorney. So thank you very much. And as always, Kim, if you ask, I will always say yes.
All right, last but not least, Gada.
Hi, all right, my name is Gada Makushi, and I'm a community advocate with the ACLU focused on school policing issues in school districts within Allegheny County. Looking at the report, like others have said, it's not surprising, but it is distressing, because every number you see in that report represents a real child that has been impacted, a real child that has been traumatized. I mean, when you look at the details, for example, when I look at summary citations and I can see a 5 and a 7-year-old were issued a summary citation for fighting, right? It makes you question the entire system and whether things like summary citations should be used at all for youth. what purpose do they serve? As far as our work, about 2 years ago, we began a project working in Allegheny County focused on school district to reduce unnecessary student involvement with the justice system. What we're working to do is reduce unnecessary student arrests, reduce harmful interactions between students and school security, and reduce or eliminate the use of summary citations as a form of punishment, right? We want to advocate for support, for resources, for the increased use of alternatives to justice system involvement. And most importantly, what we do is try and educate school leaders about the collateral consequences of student contact with the justice system, as well as what their responsibilities are and what control they have over making changes. This can happen through memorandums of understanding between school districts and police departments that outline the role that police play and when they should and shouldn't be involved. And school districts, for example, like PPS that employ their own police officers also have discretion to mandate whether school police are allowed to issue summary citations or even whether those officers can be armed. So there's a lot that school leaders can do. And often when we talk to kind of, as Tiffany was saying, as pushing this aside is, you will have one side say, well, it's a police matter. And then you will have police say, well, it's all about the teachers. And everybody plays a part and everyone has to take responsibility for the role that they play in this. That's what we've been doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Gada. And so we're going to jump right into the questions. There's been a lot of conversation in the chat as well as the Q&A, and the whole purpose of this forum, like we could have held a meeting and talked amongst ourselves, but we know the importance of having the community involved in this process. And so I'm going to, have LaTrinda start off with the questions, but I did want to say that there is one entity that is missing from this, well, more than one, but one of the main ones that was highlighted in the report was the magistrates. And although we have some judges here, we know that at the magistrate level, there are a lot of referrals to juvenile justice system, as well as where the citations and the fines and different things. And a lot of the issues that happen can be mitigated. So in the next steps, we will be having representatives from the magistrate office to be a part of this conversation, as well as other practitioners. So LaTrinda, you've been monitoring the questions. Let's start us off with a few.
Yeah, so this one is specifically for Chief Brown from Kit Dawson. So can Chief Brown or anyone please describe to us the process that has school police called to intervene with the child and how that leads to a criminal citation? Who decides that and what are the criteria and who has to okay it?
So Chief Brown, you have, yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So if we get called to a classroom, it's usually, the police officers are usually the last ones to get there. Say if it's in a high school, we have the teacher, the administrator, a security guard, and we try to de-escalate it as much as possible. Sometimes a kid might be having a serious episode and having problems. We try to clear out the classroom and talk the kid down. So a lot of our citations does not come from that. It could be, citation could come from, this is the fourth time. The teacher, the kid may have pushed someone, did something more than just scream out and was disobedient. It takes a lot more to that in order to get a disorderly conduct. And we have reduced those also with the help of the administrators handling most of the situations themselves, along with a counselor or someone who has a rapport with the kid. The police officer in the school may have a rapport. Everyone may be able to try to just de-escalate the young person, but the police officer might come and say, hey, come on, my man, let's go. Let's go talk this out somewhere in the main office. And it may help. We have, like I said, we reduced them, and we continue to reduce them by knowing our kids. My police officers, security guards know the kids pretty well. They also are in the community, from the community. They coach, they mentor kids. So a lot of times, I mean, in the past maybe, but not right now with the training and things of that nature. We try to de-escalate it as much as possible. If the young man or the young woman may continue to escalate, and then we will have to make that person as safe as possible and the people around them as safe as possible. So maybe the citation might come into effect during that time. However, there may have been 40 minutes to an hour that went past, and he may pick up a chair, he may start escalating themselves even more. But for the most part, we try to get the kid to de-escalate, get them into the main office and call a parent and see if we can de-escalate them. De-escalation techniques, I've had each year, besides this COVID year, we've had counselors and people come in to help us and teach us how to de-escalate. Even with mental illnesses and kids who have, we won't know it a lot of times, but kids who have IEPs, we try to, as we are entering the classroom before that, we try to see if that kid has a trigger or not, things of that nature. But we do try to de-escalate. If there's a citation, sometimes the school administrator might request it, and it depends on the situation. So even if they request it, we may say no.
So is there
it doesn't require it.
Is there a written policy on that, because it seems like what you're talking about is like discretionary, and so that's where we often, kind of disagree on like what could have happened or should have happened if there isn't a specific policy. And is that something that you as the chief in the school district is looking to do to make it clear on guidance on how to use those tools if necessary?
Yes, ever since I've been the chief, I've given my officers discretion. They may request it, but if it doesn't fit a crime, or if we can do it another way, we try to do it another way. Honestly.
Okay.
And that's why our reports are going down and not up.
And so I guess you initially answered no, though, that there's no specific like policy or procedure to.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Latrinda, thank you, Chief Brown. Latrinda, next question.
All right, Brad Ankney. Kim, it says, Kimberly Booth et al. I see from your report that when a young person is an adjudicated delinquent of any offense, even if not school involved, that the law requires juvenile probation office to notify school personnel. Is this done in Allegheny County? And then what is the rationale of this?
Hi, this is Kim Booth. Yes, that is law. We do notify school building principals or officials. If the question is around what was the lawmaker thinking, it sounds like you said, Latrinda, I'm not going to try to figure that out. I would think that the thought process, though, is that in some more, if you think about victims, which a lot of times in these conversations, we forget about the victim, I'm thinking that they were thinking about more crimes related to teachers and students in the buildings and letting school officials know as partners what's going on is what I'm thinking after adjudication. But I can't get into the head of a law, of somebody who makes the law, but it is the law. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's my thoughts. I don't know if Megan or Tiff want to give any thought to that, or any of the judges.
That is the law. It doesn't, I don't know what the rationale is, but that is the requirement throughout the state, and it's not discretionary. So if a probation officer were to say, I don't really think the school needs to know, that this kid was adjudicated of, I don't know, stealing a car in his neighborhood, for example, like it has no relationship to school. There's no discretion built in. It's a shall, probation shall notify the school, appropriate personnel at the school. And the school is required to keep that information separate from the kid's school file. However, the school personnel are allowed to tell, essentially the law is those who need to know within the building about the adjudication. But I don't know what the rationale behind that rule was.
LaTrinda, can I go back to, I think the initial question for Chief Brown and talk about as far as procedure and what happens. We have a code of conduct that guides the actions and consequences of our administrators that dispense discipline in the schools. So I have on the phone right now, Dr. Rod Netchai, who's the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, who oversees, and that's why we're constantly revising this code of conduct, but also not just the code of conduct itself. There needs to be training. You want to actually do training as far as how do you actually look at this from an unbiased lens and dispense the same equitable consequences across the district. Example, I'm about 6'3", 285 pounds. So as a principal, I'm going to approach it in a different way, right? Having that question, but making sure that, again, it's not subjective. We need to make sure we have a standard in place for all of our principals as we dispense that discipline. So Dr. Netchai, you want to talk a little bit about your work in revising the code of conduct?
So good evening, everybody. Rod Netchai, Assistant Superintendent for Student Support Services. So this is a role that I'm just moving into within the past couple months. I've been Assistant Superintendent working with K-8 and 6-8 schools for the last 3 years, and I was a principal for 15 years before that, just to give you a little background. But to speak to Dr. Hamlet's point, one of the things that we look at is, first of all, well, we do revise the code of conduct yearly, and so we're coming out with a new version for this year very soon. It's been revised and vetted through legal, and it's ready to go. We're also looking at building out a virtual code of conduct that will help to guide us through our time in a virtual setting and then into the hybrid model that we're slated to go into in November. I'm working with legal to change that process. Typically, the code of conduct is revised in February or March. We're going to start looking at it again for next year in November. I'm really pleased to have an opportunity to be here with this group today and to begin to undertake this work. You know, when I think about the numbers and the data that was put before us and just how staggering that is, we obviously have a lot of work to do. And a lot of that has to come through the policies that we put in place and that we keep in place and how we revise them. And so I'm really happy that we've already been talking about revising that code of conduct, the next round of revisions to begin earlier, so we're not waiting until spring and things get away from you and before you know it, you've made some changes, but you really haven't made anything that's going to make any kind of real dent into some of the systemic issues that we're talking about. I talk a lot about the restorative process, and I know Dr. Hughley has done a lot of great work at Woodland Hills using restorative practice. And as a principal, I was one of the original PERC schools, or I was part of one of the original PERC schools. And we talk a lot about how does the restorative process and how does the restorative practice intersect with the code of conduct? So how can we build capacity to not just have these proactive, restorative practice is supposed to be 80% proactive, 20% reactive. But when we get into these situations where we do have to apply the code of conduct, how can we do so in a restorative way? How can we make sure that we're not just, always, looking at the code of conduct and saying, well, it says we can do 3 days here, so let's do 3. But, maybe it doesn't have to be 3. Because the idea of being restorative is about repairing harm, making things right, being able to, put things in a place. If it's 2 students that have an issue, let's say, how do we get things into a place where they can move forward and both be happy and satisfied with whatever that is? Does it have to be a 3-day suspension? And coming off of a 3-day suspension, is that going to make a difference? The 3 days themselves, for instance, may or may not make a difference. Probably not. It's the conversation. It's the way we have restorative reentries, and we want to generalize some of those practices so we're more consistent from school to school. But how do I bring kids off of a 1-day or a 2-day or whatever that suspension may have to be when we do have to apply the code of conduct? Also within the code of conduct, there's a lot of mandates for things like, student-teacher conferences, reteaching expectations, modeling interventions, social work with interventionist counselors and social workers, changes in schedule. There's a lot of other things that can be applied as a part of that progressive discipline that we practice in order to get to those, in order so that when we get to those places where, okay, there has to be a consequence that's applied. We've already tried a whole bunch of other stuff first. But again, for me, how do we do that restoratively? How do we look at what the actual consequence is, make sure it makes sense, but make sure it's not just 3 days and then we expect them to come back differently, because we know that's not going to work, right? We know that we need to have those conversations. We need to have those parent conferences and those formal restorative conferences. And there's a whole process around that that we do really well in some places. And in some places we have some work to do. So we need to realign some of our resources, and we're working on that right now as well, to better support and be able to differentiate support for schools so that we can ensure that some of those really good practices that are part of an overall restorative mindset. So I always talk about the difference between restorative practice and restorative practices. The practices are the things that we do. The practices are the circles, the restorative conversations, restorative conferences. Practice is just a mindset. And if I have a restorative mindset, then I'm going to approach all those things. And when I know I have to apply the code of conduct, I'm going to do so in a restorative way. I'm not going to think about, did I do a circle last week and was that effective or not? I'm going to think about, okay, here's what happened. Here's where we are right now. How can I do this restoratively to make sure that this child and these children are going to understand what they did wrong, own it, help to determine what it takes to make it right, and then be able to move forward from there.
Thank you. So just based on what you said, like, we know that there are practices that work, but they have to be implemented in a holistic way. And one of the things that Dr. Hamlet talked about was the training. So we could talk about the code of conduct all day long, but if people aren't trained or, have a insight on how to implement whatever strategies are going to be given out for the response to a kid's behavior in a restorative way. And, we are all creatures of habit most times, and we're going to do what we used to do. And so it's going to take that radical change for everybody to, not, think of suspensions or citations of being the first go-to, as well as, just making sure that there are like policies around what constitutes, certain actions. And I know most of it is in the code of conduct, but it seems like most schools don't follow that. And so how do we get to that? The other thing that I wanted to just highlight is that's been brought up, and I'm gonna ask you, Dr. Hamlet, as well as Nina, to respond, is several people have brought up the lack of diversity amongst teachers in the school district. And so what strategies are you all implementing to address that?
Nina, you want to start or you want me to jump in? I'll jump in. Some of the things we're doing, number one, we recognize that that's an issue. Myself as the administrator and the superintendent, but also PPS, but also the PFT recognizes that as well. And we're working together in tandem to really come up with some programs. One of the programs that we see that we're going to implement and start this fall is our parent to teacher program. When we look at our instructional staff who are in front of our kids on a regular basis teaching, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nina, I think it's 87% white and about 9% African American, and the rest other. So in recognizing that, we understand we need to do some work. And so what we have in our para staff is about 50-50. So we developed, in conjunction with the PFT, a parent to teacher program where the district will donate some funds, PFT will donate some funds, and a foundation will donate some funds. So some of these paraprofessionals who are African American and minority can go get their teaching degree and then become teachers in Pittsburgh Public Schools. Another program we're working on is we want to highlight our teacher academy at Brashear. And so we have a plethora of students that participate in our teacher academy at Brashear High School. That program is highly diverse. And so in my former life in Palm Beach County, I was a principal, and uniquely at my school, Palm Beach Lakes, we had a teaching academy as well. And Palm Beach went so far as to actually, when these students graduated and are getting ready to graduate, they will offer them a pre-contract binder for a job. So basically, after 4 or 5 years, if you want to come back into the system, we owed you a job. We're extending the same concept here with our Brashear Teacher Academy students as well. So those are two programs that we're working on. Nina, you want to add anything?
Sure. You know what? I just want to add, this is a national problem. This is a national issue and I want to say also that our teaching academy at Brashear has gotten national attention. The American Federation of Teachers has written up our academy as a model program. We're very, very proud of it. Our kids have traveled across the country and have gotten recognized. Hannah McCarthy, our teacher, has gotten recognized for the great work, and we are really excited about the kickoff that we've been working together on, as Dr. Hamlet said, of our pair to teacher. Over half are African Americans, and we are working with them to make sure they have a great experience, and we bring those paras into the teaching profession, and we're really excited about welcoming them.
Can I say something in response to some of the comments? And Dr. Rod, I appreciate everything you said. I think this ties together a couple of the recent comments. And I think, and I've had conversations with Dr. Hamlet, Erica, and the PPS team about this work. And I know they believe in bringing these kind of models to PPS. But the one thing that's really critical is who is leading the work in the building. And in too many cases, the restorative work is assigned to someone that already has a full-time job, who's already the social worker or the third grade, team lead. And they don't have the time to implement a full program. So that makes it very, very challenging. So in our model, and this is not stuff we made up, we went to Oakland, we went to Houston, and saw how great programs do this. If you have a situation where there's a child in a class having an episode, as the chief talked about, you have a person that can go in there that is not a disciplinarian. They're seen as someone that is, maybe they're looked at as a mentor. Our guy, Mr. Sean's kids call him uncle, kids call him cousin, even dad sometimes. When he shows up, they know it's not because he wants to get them in trouble, but he's worked very hard to build a relationship with them, and they're responsive, and it helps to alleviate and avert a lot of crises. And that's his full-time job, to know the kids, to make sure they know each other, and we're also able to head off a lot of the problems before they happen. And so I think that's really critical, that the work is not thrown on the shoulders of someone on the staff to lead that already has a lot of duties. And I know, again, that requires resources. It doesn't mean we shouldn't start there, because we do. Well, Hills High School does not have that kind of person, but they're still able to do it in other ways. I think the long-term sustainable model is to have someone in the building that does the proactive and responsive work, that leads it, and that's their job.
So if I could jump in, I just want to echo that. I think that that would be, in an ideal world, we'd have somebody in every building whose full-time job it was to lead that work. And we know that's not realistic at this point, but that's part of what I alluded to a little bit ago in terms of just realigning some resources. So we are looking at some ways that we can better support at the building level, so that we can use the capacity that we have with some of our most highly trained people to build capacity in every building to better live that restorative approach. One other thing I wanted to mention, and when we talk about training, is something that I just became aware of through Angela Alley from our equity department. One of the recommendations coming out of our equity advisory panel, in response to one of those, we are going to be moving forward here in the next week or so with an RFP to find a company to lead implicit bias training. So we're going to have a situation where we have up to 20 trainers within the district that will be trained, and then those folks will go out and train across several different role groups. I mean, we're talking about principals, teachers, social workers, guidance counselors, school police, but just an opportunity to deepen our understanding around implicit bias. And this is a grant that we're receiving. And again, I just found out the details yesterday, but this is something that I'm looking forward to really working with here in the next week or two to get that RFP out and to get that process rolling so we can get our trainers trained and then begin to get that out to everybody.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to LaTrinda, but I just want to say one thing to your comment is that, that's why we're here to, think about some of the solutions and not, focus on what the limitations are, because, if that's what it's going to take for our students to feel safe and to be safe and to not be referring to the juvenile justice system, then we need to find a way to make that happen. And so this is a call to action to everybody listening, everybody that done read the report, everybody that done work before that. I'm glad you brought up the Equity Advisory Panel, because they've been trying to do this work for years. It's not isolated. There's so many different organizations and people that have been, and still on ready to help and to support this. So I'm encouraged about the next steps of thinking about what are some of the solutions and not let finances be the determining factor of not trying to get it done. So, LaTrinda, I know that there was, you wanted to move in a different direction. We had, I think it was the magistrate's department.
Yeah, she was on, but I don't see her anymore. She had her hand raised. So, Ann Harrod, are you still here? I don't think she's on. So I think one of the questions, another question that was here in the chat, one, and this is for Dr. James Hughley, is it realistic to establish a positive school culture for Black students without any diversity in staff?
That's a great question. Is it realistic? Everything is, it's not all or nothing. So almost all schools do have mostly white staffs. And, there are schools that have positive cultures with mostly white staff. So I think it definitely can be done. That said, it should, and it definitely should be a priority to have more Black teachers in front of Black kids. And the research is pretty clear that it really matters for discipline, that Black kids are not disciplined or punished in the same way when they have Black teachers. So that is a priority. It should be. Well, it's a priority for me. I'm hoping it's a priority for everybody here. It sounds like it is. But what we have right now is the teachers that we have right now. And we've definitely seen teachers of different races do great work. So I believe it's possible. We've definitely seen schools with majority white staff do good work. So it's what they call an and both. We need to build those cultures up and, try to recruit stronger and better to diversify our teaching force.
Awesome. And Ann Harrod is unmuted, or you can unmute yourself now, I think. Let's see. Okay. All right. Okay. As we figure that out,
I have a question, and I think that, this is open to the panelists, but specifically for Dr. Hamlet and the school district, and, Chief Brown. So we know that we're here, everybody's working remote, COVID-19. And I think that in the chat, there was conversations about the trauma. Even Jay said in his introduction, talked about, poverty, trauma, and then just all the things that our kids have been going through. And so then, hopefully, at the end of 9 weeks, I don't think that probably is going to happen, but whenever they are back in the school building, we can anticipate that there's going to be some period of adjustment and readjustment. What strategies are you all working on to prepare for the return of school being back in the brick and mortar?
So I can tell you our employees and teachers are due back to the buildings on October 5th. And we certainly have plans in place to infuse socio-emotional learning, or SEL, into our content for our students, but also trauma-informed care as well. as well, and also trauma-informed practices, as we do understand the impact of this, not just on our students, but on our faculty and staff as well, and others in our community as well. So COVID has created trauma that wasn't there before, and it just has exacerbated the trauma that's currently in our marginalized communities for our marginalized students. So we truly understand that. Even so, to the point, even with our online, beginning for online classes, beginning the first 9 weeks, we did somewhat of a soft launch, per se, you want to say. We want to make sure that we emphasize developing relationships, getting students acclimated to the online environment, doing social and emotional lessons, and really having these conversations to get kids acclimated back, and not just automatically first day academics are in your face. We understand and we know that a lot of things are going on. Students bring a lot of issues with them sometimes from their community that they have no recourse or really don't know how to react to that or how to deal with those things. And so we understand that. And so we're putting some measures in place to make sure that our teachers understand that and they get supported in training, but also our administrators as well, our paraprofessionals, even our custodians, every adult in the building. And also we actually going to start working with our bus drivers. So if you didn't know, we don't house transportation in Pittsburgh Public Schools. That is outsourced, but we still want to train those. Why? Those students, the bus drivers, probably the first adults, sometimes besides the parents, the students are going to see in the morning. And so we need to train them as well because they're working with our students. So Doc, I don't know if you want to chime in with some additional from student services.
The only other thing I wanted to add at this point, I think you did a good job of covering all that, but I wanted to add that we are also working on finalizing plans around a universal screener so that we can get, from kids, to be able to gauge where kids are and just to get more information. It's a well-being survey that sits within our Panorama platform that we already use we've been using for a social emotional learning survey. So it's a well-being survey that is in there along with some of the pieces from the SEL survey, but it's really for us to be able to gauge students and gauge individual students, and it's for students in 3 through 12. There's not really one for K to 2 at this point. We do that more with individual conversations and small group conversations and things like that. But for our kids in 3 to 12, once we can get this finalized, we'll be able to use that data to hopefully pull out individually be able to pull out and apply services as appropriate.
Thank you. Katrinda?
Yes. So still, I see in here it is back on. Still
I am.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right, no worries. All right. Did you want to say something?
No. I just didn't know if you had a question for me about the magisterial district court systems.
No, gotcha. Sorry, we saw your hand was raised, and so.
No, I'm sorry. No.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you. So we also have another question here, specifically about identifying officers, and what is the school district doing to identify officers who have who tend to charge students of color more? Is there any work that's happening to address those specific officers who have that bias towards students of color? And what measures are being taken to discipline those officers or give some sort of counseling? And maybe that's for Chief Brown or, folks representing Pittsburgh Public Schools.
Chief, you want to speak to that a little bit? But also, Chief, before you start, I want to say this. As mentioned in my comments before, we actually did a RFP, 2 RFPs, one for evaluation of our K-2 suspension ban work that we're doing, but also board just approved one yesterday for evaluation of work, looking at our police calls, our arrests, and our citations. That's going to help us get some understanding of where we are in that, but also we put some new systems in place so we can actually extrapolate the citations and also the arrest and drill down and begin to match that to our student data. And so that's something that we're doing right now. We understand the work needs to happen, and there's no system out there like that, and that's why we're actually creating this system. And this evaluation is going to help us get the data and some of the elements we need to make that happen for our students in our community. Chief? Chief, you going to say anything? I thought you had your mic off. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
So it's almost like it's a job that the officers must do. I don't think any of my officers after the training, I would have noticed that in the beginning, and I would have addressed it. It's not a bias thing, I don't think. It's just a job that the officers must do. And it may be a black officer or a white officer who arrested, who may have wrote a citation or made an arrest. You have to understand a lot of our arrests have victims involved. So there may be an assault. And we don't want to victimize the victim twice by not investigating it and seeing what needs to be done. So it could be a white officer or a black officer. If I feel that I have an officer who is biased, I will definitely address that and go through HR with the discipline process.
Okay. So we do have one question in here for you that we received, specifically the role of magistrates in issuing fines to students and the amount. Is there any oversight over who is issued fines and the amount?
Every magisterial district judge is independently elected as an official. Most of the fine amounts for summary citations are what we call a sliding fine, where they range, between 25 to, a few $100s. So it's honestly within each judge's discretion as to what the fine amount should be. And each judge has a different philosophy on that. I think most of them really don't want to impose large fines because they realize it really isn't helpful to the situation. Sometimes I think they feel it's the last resort. My opinion is most of the MDJs really, are anxious and hungry for diversion programs and things that can help these juveniles. And it's not just about fining them per se. They really, that's not the main goal. It's not a money-making system for the courts. The courts don't even receive any money from these fines. It goes to the state and the county and the city. So there is not an oversight of the fine amount because they're all independent elected officials. And as long as the fine amounts are still in the state statutes, they're within their rights and it's legal to impose the fine.
Thank you. So we only have 4 minutes. We try to be so conscious of people's time. And so thank you, all the panelists, but even just the people that are participants and the questions. And so we are going to take those questions and attempt to answer them and even have a part of our forum next week. And then there will be information for ongoing sessions. Maybe the next time we will isolate and maybe, have the magistrates and then have, the teachers and the teachers union, start to break out these smaller group conversations and really try to dive deeply into what are some of the policies and practices that we can change. So as we wrap up, I'm going to kick it over to LaTrinda and she's going to ask the final question and then we're going to end for today.
Awesome. And this is really directed to those that, we didn't hear a lot from during the question and answer period. And so specifically for the judges that are on, Commander Lando, Cheryl, Samantha, Megan, Sarah, Gada even, if you have thoughts in 30 seconds or less on the next steps that we should take, or a solution that we should really be focusing in on, can you share what that is? 30 seconds or less. Okay, go.
I'll share real quick. Just like I touched on earlier, there's a lot of great ideas and I think, everyone on this call is they're invested and they're very passionate, but I don't think that we can really come up with significant and meaningful solutions until we really dig deep into the data and just really find out what exactly, in each case that we're looking at, what is the driving force behind the referral? I think that will reveal a lot. Is it bias? Is it something going on with the teachers? Is it something going on with the police? before we kind of come up with an approach as to how to deal with it, we have to really know what's really underneath those statistics that we're looking at. I think that's really important. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you. Anybody else?
LaTrenda, this is Samantha. I would just say, we've had some success around addressing racial disparity within our department, around really taking the numbers and talking about the issues, but making them available and aware, everyone in the department aware of how their decisions impact those outcomes. So for everyone that's on the call or everyone that's listening, to take this report and bring it to your world and talk to your people about it and see what energy you can generate from your piece of this, I think is an important, very first step.
Thank you. So I would like to share some next steps. God is going to share a slide. So next week we have our 5th annual Equity Summit and Award Ceremony that will be on next week, and then I'll go over quickly in the next slide. And then as we talked about earlier, Sarah and Kim convened the Juvenile Justice Working Group. They will be meeting during the summit, but then there will be additional meetings. Probably in mid to late October, we'll set up another meeting to continue this conversation and to actually be about action. Because this is a call to action. Anybody that has been a part of the Black Girls Equity Alliance and the work that we're doing, it is, we don't just come and meet just to be meeting to talk and to socialize. It's really action oriented. And so I feel like we are right here at the cusp of what needs to happen, have the right people sitting at the table to help us to move this forward. So on the next slide, it'll go over briefly our summit. And on Monday, we will be having a kickoff rally that will happen in front of our building. And so that will happen. And then on Tuesday, we're also having a watch event that highlights our keynote speaker, Centoya Brown Long. So join us for that. All this information is also on our website. I want to shout out our 2020 See the Best of Me awardees this year. Jackie Hoover from Allegheny County Department of Human Services, Marcia Martin from Gateway Health, Michelle McMurray from the Pittsburgh Foundation, Dr. Carrasco from A Child's Place, and A Child's Place, and then last but certainly not least, Valerie McDonald Roberts. And then our summit is a 2-day event. So some of these dates, there is still the opportunity to take advantage of the early registration, and then there are some opportunities to attend without any fees to it. So there, have to go to the website and see the additional information. So any last closing words, LaTrenda, on your behalf?
No, just I think this is there's an opportunity to keep this conversation, going to, push for racial equity and anti-racist practices in all of our institutions.
Absolutely. Any last words anybody else wants to say? Well, I want to just take this time again to thank you all for your time and attention and even commitment to working together to address these issues. As I said, this is going to be open to the community. I can't wait till we're post-COVID and we can be in, an auditorium and, having, these working sessions and really talk, planning out how we're going to change policy and do some great things here for our children. Because at the end of the day, we have to come together for our children. So thank you, everybody. Panelists, I sent you all the link to, go to debrief. And so if you can join that, that would be great. And I guess see you all next week at the summit.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one.